my loneliness unbroken, quit the bust above my door, take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Unquote. Most of us will recognize this quote from Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, having read it in high school. But could any of us name another piece that he has written? Could we pinpoint what his real impact on literature was? Edgar Allan Poe's work is important even today. This morning, we will examine the themes in Poe's pieces, take a look at his most famous works, and see how Poe has influenced others. Now, let's look at the themes most used by Edgar Allan Poe. The themes implemented by Poe tend to be rather somber. According to Dr. Mark Canada, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke, Poe was a master of the Gothic genre. This genre includes many aspects of horror. Edgar Allan Poe had a, quote, fascination with death, particularly the death of women, unquote. Poe was also famous for the invention of detective stories. Dr. Mark Canada also cites that Edgar Allan Poe was a fan of psychology and phrenology, a pseudoscience focusing on the concept that certain regions of the brain have special functions. This pseudoscience led Poe to themes of, quote, self-destruction, madness, and imagination, unquote. Since we have examined the themes Poe used, now we'll move on to his most recognized works. Although The Raven is arguably Poe's most famous work, there are several other pieces that have garnered attention. Poe200.com summarizes The Telltale Heart as a short story about a man who has murdered another man and buries him beneath his floorboards. The murderer is then visited by police officers, and the guilt he feels drives him to hallucinating his victim's heartbeat coming from underneath his floor. He eventually admits his crime to the officers. The Cask of Amontillado is another famous piece by Poe. As described by Poe200.com, it features a man named Montresor who buries another man in his wine cellar as revenge for being insulted. The title comes from the vintage wine used to lure the man into Montresor's cellar. Poestories.com also lists The Fall of the House of Usher as one of the best-read stories written by Poe. The story follows the narrator as he receives a letter from his childhood friend, Roderick Usher, and visits him at his mansion, where unexpected things take place. The last story I will mention is The Pit and the Pendulum, my personal favorite. Set during the Spanish Inquisition, the narrator finds himself trapped in a torture chamber where an axe-like blade swings back and forth, getting closer to him with each swing, like a pendulum. He manages to escape his bindings, only to discover a pit in the room. Edgar Allan Poe's famous pieces include The Telltale Heart, The Cask of Amontillado, The Fall of the House of Usher, and The Pit and the Pendulum. So let's see how those pieces influenced other works. Poe's influence has spread farther than one might think. As mentioned before, Edgar Allan Poe invented the detective story. In fact, the Poe Museum says that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, author of the Sherlock Holmes series, wrote, quote, "Where was the detective story before Poe breathed the breath of life into it," unquote. Needless to say, Doyle was very inspired by Poe. The Poe Museum also wrote an article that Jules Verne, author of Around the World in 80 Days, was inspired by Edgar Allan Poe. Verne, in fact, wrote a sequel to one of Poe's novels. So in addition to pieces of literature that Poe inspired, he also inspired movie makers. So this is a art piece for advertisement of The Fall of the House of Usher by Roger Corman, who also directed The Silence of the Lambs. Roger Corman did a bunch of movies based on Poe's works, such as The Pit and the Pendulum, The Mask of the Red Death, and The Raven in the 50s and 60s. The Poe Museum also lists H.P. Lovecraft, Alfred Hitchcock, Stephen King, and Dario Argento as being influenced by Poe. Today, we have delved into the themes that occur within Poe's work, explored his most famous pieces, and seen how those pieces have influenced others. Edgar Allan Poe's work is still important. The next time you have to discuss Poe in an English class, you can impress your teacher by knowing some of his other works. The Raven may be famous, but it wasn't all Poe had to offer.